All right, Mr. Vice Chair, then we are ready to begin.
No.
Good afternoon, Dr. Parker, members of the board.
We're not making any decisions.
It's a study session.
Good afternoon, Dr. Parker. Good afternoon, members of the board. This is the 18-19 fiscal year budget workshop, and we're going to be talking about goals and priority objectives, the budget, and the proposed amendments to Regulation 3. So the goals and objectives have a hierarchy where we start with the mission statement, and we have 3 goals and various priority objectives under each of them. Our mission statement is to clean the air and protect the health of all residents in the South Coast Air District through practical and innovative strategies. Our 3 goals are achieve clean air standards, enhance public education and ensure equitable treatment of all communities, and operate efficiently and transparently. This year, we have achieved some of the objectives, and we have slight modifications to propose, and also we've added some more objectives to some of our goals for your review. So the first goal, I'm sorry, I'm still on the mission statement. The first goal is achieve clean air standards, and in that you will see that objective number 5 has complete all Title V inspections, and the Title V facility number has changed, so that's been updated. And number 6 is where we are talking about our permit backlog, and we have achieved 98% of our reduction of the permit backlog. So now we want to maintain it at a level of 2,500 to 3,000 permits in that backlog, but they will exclude permits to construct and reclaim transition applications. An objective has been added, which is number 8, which is initiate implementation of the 5th multiple air toxics exposure study, and the performance measurement for that is to conduct fixed site monitoring at 10 sites, begin work on updating the emission inventory, and deploy 5 different advanced monitoring methods. So that's the first goal, and should I continue, or if there are any questions, we can talk about it? Continue? Okay.
Well, I guess the question is, Mr. Chairman, whether you want us to ask the questions now or wait till the end.
Well, either way that the board members would prefer, which one would you prefer to ask all your questions at the end or as we go along? It may be helpful to ask it now as you go along so that you can remember what it is that you want to have the speaker comment about.
Well, and if I could, I would just say that goal 1.3, which is the performance measure of securing $400 billion, we all know that is significantly below what we need in terms of achieving the SCAQMD. So it might be a realistic goal, but I'm not sure if because it's so far away, and we obviously didn't raise $1 billion last year. How do we deal with that? Is that, I mean, is it better just to put something that's a little more realistic, or put something that's a little more in line with what we need to do?
Well, I don't think it's unrealistic. I think the fact that we were able to secure significant funding from the GGRF played a role. This year, I would say from our revenue perspective, we're still not quite done. We anticipate a large chunk of the VW settlement. The 400 was admittedly a stretch goal. It's not $1 billion. There was some discussion amongst us when we set that goal of having perhaps 300 million, but I did want it to be stretched. I think the first year that we launched into the program, 400 was sort of on the realm of doable, but it was still stretch. My point now is that with the VW settlement, coming into place, the extensive discussions that are going on in Sacramento right now for the ongoing commitment, not only for the implementation of AB 617, but for the incentive funding as well, trying to get that locked in, if you will. So if we do that and if we do all the others, I think that 400 is still a reasonable number just at the state. I think there are other options that we've talked about from a conceptual perspective that realistically those wouldn't have an opportunity to
Come in within 12 months.
Right. And so I certainly wouldn't include that, but I think that as we continue to look at the all of the above approach, that it's still something to consider, that we still continue to work hard on the DC aspect, and that's something that we're doing. So I'm just, from my perspective, I know I like to be pushed. That's why I love you so much, Dr. Liu. So having a stretch goal for our perspective is worthwhile, but
and 400 is a stretch goal.
it's a stretch.
I know, I think it is, especially since, I mean, what's proposed for this year and the initial budget that was issued by the governor and his administration was much less than last year. We'll have to see what the legislature does with that and what happens in the May revise in a few days. And I think the thing that we just have to keep at the top of our minds is that this is nowhere near. We're falling farther and farther behind each year on the $1 billion a year that we need to actually get to where we need to go. Having that money a little bit later on in the process may be okay if the technology develops as quickly as it needs to and gets less expensive so that we can have more impact with each dollar we spend. But I think we just have to keep it in mind that, you know, even though it's a stretch goal, it doesn't get us where we need to go. So I think I'd be okay with that staying as it is. Thanks for that explanation.
Sure.
And like you said, with technology advancing, you know, one thing that we hadn't planned for in the AQMP was the Tesla semi-truck unveil, right? And still a lot of unknowns and all of that. But if you take it at its face value, then, you know, they're half the cost of what some of the other electric trucks are out there, right? So again, I know there's a lot of assumptions that need to be made, but I mean, there is technological advancement that we will see, and some of those numbers are fungible, so to speak. So could you address a little bit about the smog abatement fee and when we'd start realizing some dollars with respect to that?
Sure. So on the Carl Moyer program, given the legislation that we did last year, it wasn't going to be implemented this year to allow for, as I recall, was it
DMV implementation?
DMV implementation. So at the next fiscal year is when we'll start realizing that.
Okay.
And I believe that of that revenue, it was about 20 to 30 million
Right.
was going to be coming to the district, in addition to what we currently earn.
And little just fractions at a time, obviously, but yeah, so every little bit counts.
Right. And we're pushing hard to make sure that on the Carl Moyer Fund, for instance, there's a current 25 million diversion from the Carl Moyer for Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we're saying there's no nexus, but we're fighting for every penny, every $1 million here, every $1 million there.
Sure.
For the program.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And next.
Proceed.
So Goal 2 also has 5 objectives, and there are some slight modifications. To number 3, we are saying now timely investigation of community complaints, because last year there was a need to come up with standardized acknowledgement time for community complaints, and now we have done that, which is to address community complaints in 2 hours. So the performance measurement is going to be during normal AQMD business hours, contact 90% of complainants within 2 hours of complaint received. And number 4 is related to social media efforts, and the performance measurement is going up from 10% to 30% increase in the social media followers. And number 5 also is being modified to engage young persons. The last year goal was to form an advisory group, and now it is going to be conduct 4 meetings with the young persons advisory group. The next goal is to operate efficiently and transparently. Here too, we are actually making our objective number 2 a little bit more stringent, where we are saying that percentage of stakeholder workshop groups and meeting agendas with material will be made available to public. Instead of 40 hours, we are making it 72 hours prior to the meeting.
I'd like to comment on this particular point. As I said a little bit earlier, I personally like stretch goals. I think it makes us work a little bit harder. This is a very difficult goal, and it's a very fluid environment when staff is working to develop all of the material on top of all the rulemaking efforts. And I want to acknowledge that I know how difficult it is. And there was a tremendous desire from staff to make this even shorter in some way, whether we said days, whether it was 24 hours, but we also have to be sensitive to the business groups, the stakeholders, who have a real desire to have a meaningful dialogue and get that information out to them. We work hard to get a lot of the board packets out a week before, and I think that's had a tremendous improvement in the overall discussions and the readiness when we do have the meeting. I would have loved to have said this was actually 1 week beforehand, but it's just too much. And so I just want to really highlight the fact that while it's a stretch goal, we may not always be able to make it. 48 in of itself is even a tougher goal, but it's something that we're going to strive to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. And also, objective number 5, we have achieved or will achieve by June 30th the 9 out of 15 EGIS projects, and the 6 remaining are going to be completed in the next fiscal year. And we are adding one more objective to this goal, which is to implement Cloud Office Suite. And the goal is to migrate 100% of staff to Cloud Office email service. So with that, I'll move on to our budget. And this is the fiscal year 18-19 budget. And what it's going to comprise of is a summary of the general fund. And then I'll talk about a little bit in detail about the expenditure comparison with fiscal year 17-18. And then there are some position realignments that I'll show. And then we have a pie chart on our expenditures by category, and then a revenue comparison, and then a 5-year projection. So with that, let me just talk about this general fund budget summary. So this is a comparison of our 17-18 budget with 18-19, and you can see that the 17-18 budget was also a deficit budget of $2.9 million, and the 18-19 budget is also a deficit of $3.6 million. The 2 other columns are showing the amendments to the 17-18 budget, which are brought to the board and for their approval. And then we estimate to end 17-18 a little bit better than the $2.9 million deficit. We think we'll have a deficit of $1 million approximately, and that's because
Excuse me, may I ask, what is being shown on the screen is not what you are speaking about. So those who may be looking, watching, not seeing the same thing that you're referencing.
I'm sorry, Dr. Parker. Robert?
What do you have on the screen, Dr. Parker?
You have slide 10?
What slide?
Yes, are you on, what slide are you on? 9, 10?
10, Dr. Parker.
The 2018-19.
Well, 9 is being shown on the screen.
Oh. Update.
There must be some video problem, Dr. Parker. Let's see if we can correct that, because on our screen we're showing slide 10.
Oh, okay. Well, here I was only seeing 9. I don't know about you.
How about
Mr.
now?
I'm following. I'm following them.
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. Got some difficulties.
Do you have
It would
number
help if the
10?
presenter would talk into the microphone a little clearer. It sort of breaks up here a little bit.
Yeah, we're having transmission problems, so maybe when you change,
I can hear everybody except the presenter, and it's sort of, I can hear, but it breaks up a little bit. Just stay maybe a little closer to the microphone, be okay.
okay, and when you then begin to speak about a slide, give us the page number, then we can follow you from our hard copy.
Oh, okay, Dr. Parker, I will do that. And Supervisor Ashley, can you hear me now?
Right when you start to get into a sandwich.
Hey, wait, yes.
There's no slide.
Okay.
Sujata, like this.
Okay. I need this too.
I can do that.
She's on her arm now.
This is a
Is that in the budget, a new arm for John?
Okay. So where was I? I was still talking about the general fund budget and its comparison between the adopted 17-18 and proposed 18-19 budget. So I was describing that we have a deficit budget in both the years, and we expect to end 17-18 a little bit better than what was proposed and adopted at a $1 million deficit. And the main reason why we think we'll have a little bit better end is because we had some salary savings because of a little bit higher vacancy rate than our 8% that we budget. And the difference between the revenue and expenditures between the 17-18 and 18-19 budget is approximately $14-some million. And coincidentally, on the expenditure side also, it's about $14-some million. And that's because in the revenue this year, we will be getting AB 617 money. We have the second year of Title V and non-Title V fees, and also we have a CPI increase. And on the expenditure side, it is also higher because of increased retirement cost, our first year of labor contract, and also new positions. Dr. Parker, I'm going to be on slide 11 now. And this is an expenditure comparison of 17-18 budget versus 18-19 proposed expenditures. Once again, the main difference is in the salary and benefits. And this again is due to our first year of labor negotiation contract of $2.8 million. And the retirement cost is increased by almost $5.5 million. We have almost $3.5 million of this was because of SB Sarah changing their investment rate of return from 7.5 to 7.25%. And also because of new positions, retirement cost is going to increase. And we also have new positions. Almost $5.8 million is going to be because of that. But many of these new positions have a cost recovery because they are coming from AB 617 grant or Rule 1180 or AB 134. Our next two slides, Dr. Parker, are slide 12 and slide 13, which is going to talk about position realignments and also additions of some positions. So let me talk about the realignments first. These realignments were, 15 positions were deleted and 14 were added. Also, a 0.4 FTE was added for a 5-month overlap for an ADO position in science and technology because our ADO is going to retire in late fall. And then we also have 5 new positions that have been added for Rule 1180 work. So the total cost of the realignments is about $260,000, and for Rule 118 positions is about $720,000, and that's about $1 million. But as I said, $720,000 of that will be recovered from Rule 1180. The next slide, Dr. Parker, is slide 14. And this is showing expenditures by activity. And the reason for this slide is just to show that about 73 to 75% of AQMD's expenditures are concentrated in activities such as compliance, permitting, monitoring, and rulemaking. We spend almost $120 million on those activities. The next slide is slide 15, and this is similar to the expenditure comparison, where we are comparing 2017-18 budgeted revenues to 2018-19 budgeted proposed revenues. And the revenues for 17-18 were $147 million, and for 18-19 they're going to be $162.6 million, a difference of almost $14 million. And as I go through this, you will see the main differences are in annual renewal fees, about $4 million, and that's because we have the second year of Title V and non-Title V fee increases, which is $2.1 million for non-Title V and 1.3 for Title V fees, and also CPI came in a little bit higher, so it'll be about $800,000 for that. And then you will also see a difference in mobile source line, and it's an increase of almost $2.4 million. That is the administrative cost that will be coming in, being recovered from AB 134. And in the other category also, we have an increase of almost $8 million, and that is money from AB 617 and Rule 118 being reflected over there. The next slide is a 5-year projection, and over here you can see that although our governing board's policy is to have the fund balance at 20%, in the out years after 2021, the fund balance is declining below the 20% mark. But in this 5-year projection, we have already included things like increased retirement cost, the 3-year labor contract. We've included CPI to be approximately 2.9% each year. We've included the second and third year of fee increases for Title V and non-Title V fees. And we also are showing that one of the bonds, the pension obligation bonds, is going to be paid off in fiscal year 22-23 in the amount of about $3 million. And we have added 10 more positions in fiscal year 19-20 in anticipation of AB 617 becoming an ongoing grant. So with that concludes the budget presentation. I also have 2 slides on proposed amendments to Regulation 3 fees. This is slide 17, and here the proposed amendment Reg 3 fees, is annual CPI based increase of 3.4% across the board, and 10 targeted proposals mainly for cost recovery in areas such as Rule 1180, Reclaim Sunset, Rule 1402, and Rule 1466. There are also 23 other proposed fee changes, but they don't have any dollar impact. They're administrative in nature. And on the next slide, you'll see the dollar impacts of these fees. The biggest ones are the refinery-related community air monitoring system fee for Rule 1180. That's anticipated to bring about $9 million over a period of 3 years. And the other big one is the facility permit reissuance fee for reclaim transition. That will bring about $1.5 million or $1.6 million over 3 years. And the other ones, maybe the AB 2588 potentially high risk level facility fee is $300 each year, and it is about $100 for $300,000, for each year. And it's estimated at that there are 3 facilities and $100,000 cap. So with that, I have just one more slide to go through for the budget timeline. And this one, our socioeconomic impact analysis is available around March 15th. By early April, the budget is, and the work program is available for public review. Then on April 6th, we have our Budget Advisory Committee. And on April 10th, we have our public consultation meeting. And any comments from there is due to the board today. We also are having today our budget workshop for the governing board. And then on May 4th, the budget will be presented to the full board for their adoption and approval. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. One question that I do have, you did state, and I didn't see it clearly spelled out, what are the long-term projections for retirement benefits and the payment itself so that we would be current on an ongoing basis relative to the those that we had originally set for, I should say, the returns for those amounts that we were putting in, which we were not able to get when the interest rates and the yields themselves were much lower. So how is that being handled within the budget?
So Dr. Parker, if I understand your question, are you referring to the pension liability?
Yes.
Okay. So Dr. Parker, and I think Dr. Liu asked this question also, was our pension liability is approximately $200 million, but SB Sarah gives us every year how much we are supposed to contribute every year to them. And part of that contribution is to defray the long-term pension liability. So we are current in making our contributions to SB Sarah. This year it's about 28 million, and next year is going to become about 34.5 million. And we have it in the budget, and that's why I was saying that those costs are already reflected in the budget.
Okay. That was my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further questions from any of the other board members?
Just on this issue, I did ask this question of staff prior to the meeting, and I recommended that they prepare an assessment of what our situation is, what others have done to address their pension liabilities, and then proposals on how we're going to deal with our pension liability issues. And they said that they would prepare that for us. So I wanted to bring them up to, I don't know if staff has anything else to add, but that's the response I got.
Yes, Dr. Liu, we will bring it up hopefully at the June admin. We will try to put something together as to what others are doing and perhaps, what our...
I will sleep a little better at night once I've seen something.
Okay, we will try to do it as soon as possible.
Thank you.
But I think it's fair to say that this is a statewide issue. And as I've heard...
I don't have fiduciary responsibility for the entire state. I have fiduciary responsibility for this agency. So
No, I
I'd
understand
love
that.
to see it.
Right.
Us dealing with it, and I know it's not a comfortable thing to deal with, but it's a necessary thing. And I don't care. I mean, in some ways, I don't care what everybody else is doing. I think we need to take it seriously, and we need to have a plan on dealing with it.
Yeah, the point that I wanted to make is that we are taking it seriously. There's only a limited amount that we can do, and as I was about to say, the chairman and others have said, the state's going to have to take action to address this. We put in an additional 1, 2, 3, whatever million it is. When you have a 200 million liability,
It'll take us a while.
it'll take a long time. But we take it seriously, and we'll provide information back. There was one other item that I just wanted to ask. In regards to revenue, we didn't realize ongoing revenue from 617 implementation because it was only a one-year bill. But this year, it's anticipated that those costs will be made, hopefully, long-term funding made available to the districts. And that would offset a lot of the costs that we had talked about, right?
Yes.
For this pension plan, what is the discount rate that they're projecting?
So as of the last actuarial valuation that was done December 2017, SB Sarah has moved their rate of return assumption from 7.5 to 7.25. And that is why in our budget we have that extra cost because they have given us those rates.
Right.
And that cost us almost about $3.8 million. So they are, once again, they don't usually look at it every year. They look at it once in 2 or 3 years to move it, but they look at it, they're pretty, conservative, and so we will watch out for that.
Are the assumptions that we're staying current now, but we just have the liability for the past
Yes.
years?
It's every time Dr. Parker, like I explained to Mitchell, is that if SB Sarah changes any assumption, that will impact the long-term liability, and it also gets reflected in the contribution rate that we have to pay them on an annual basis. So when they move the assumption from 7.5 to 7.25, a portion of that big liability is hitting us every year. We'll continue to do that. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, so what, so what percentage is the pension payment each year? What percent of that is that of our total budget, our total revenues? About 25%?
We are paying
we're paying 41 million now
30,
in this budget.
34.5 million. We will be
Okay.
paying in
Okay, 34.5.
18-19. Yes.
Yeah, that's still a real high percentage. Over time, this is going to just become a larger and larger part of our budget. But everybody has that problem, and I mean, we're going to be up against it for about 7 or 8 years. It's going to be like this. So then after that, it levels off. Everybody should be paid up unless we have another catastrophic drop in the stock market.
And also, Supervisor Ashley, the law when it changed from to PEPRA, their percentage is not too different. Their contribution rate is not too different, but it is a little bit lower. So
yeah, that's helping. Yeah, for the new employees, it's not as bad. Good. Okay, thank you very much.
thank you.
Okay. Any further questions from any other board members? Well, how about public comment? Any public comment there at CC8?
Thank you,
Dr. Parker.
Mr. Coleman, but I think he's hit his limit today. No, go ahead.
Just trying to be helpful. Kurt Coleman, Southern California Air Quality Alliance. As you've been advised by staff, there are a number of new targeted fees, and many of those are based on a time and materials basis, or a flat fee up front and time and materials if the flat fee doesn't cover it. Normally, I would say this, that if it hadn't been for the good work that Wayne and Jill and Lockheed have been doing to improve productivity and improve the management administration over the permanent program, you'd probably be hearing a lot more chirping. So we're going to trust that they will continue that work and continue to oversee it. Obviously, you have a concern that someone who gets a slower engineer may end up paying more for the same service that someone else gets. But this is, no one really knows what it's going to cost to move these facilities, the permits out of Title V and into command and control. That's ironically, I mean, for
Out of reclaim.
reclaim, I'm sorry, yeah, sorry.
What's
No.
your Title V?
Actually, you can get out
It's a
of
little
Title
hard.
V, yeah.
Well, under 4 tons per.
Out of reclaim. And it is interesting. It has been pointed out that we did say it was going to be a Herculean task, and it is turning out to be so. But we've had productive meetings with the staff, even at the Reclaim Working Group yesterday. And one of the things we want to make sure is that as long as these permits are going to be open, there's an opportunity then to do some cleanup of, obsolete or inconsistent permit conditions that apply to the same type of equipment. And Lockheed said yes, that they're willing to do that. It may cost a little more, but that'll be up to the facility. But it's an opportunity then to do some permit cleanup. And so we'll work with the staff, and if we see problems, we will let them know. But again, as I always say every year, this board and the staff has built up a lot of goodwill with the budget process in terms of watching where the dollars go and trying to maintain tight fiscal controls and not going overboard. So we think that we agree that the district needs to be adequately funded, and it makes more sense to do targeted fees to recover costs than just a general across-the-board fee increase. So we'll watch this and see how it goes, and hopefully it will go well. Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis.
I guess I'm here to chirp.
Oops.
Hi, I'm Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance, and I guess the problem that the recurring problem that I have is that these budgets never get less; they always get larger. And serving on the Budget Advisory Committee, we're always reminded that you have an obligation to recover your costs, and yet nobody ever tells businesses how we can recover our costs. And the cost of doing business keeps going up, and the amount of regulations, rules and regulations also keep becoming more stringent. Kurt was talking about the permit backlog and the good work that Lockheed is doing and everyone else, and we certainly agree with that. But one of the things that I see on our Budget Advisory Committee, by the way, there's no board member associated with that, and we only meet a couple of times a year.
Looking for volunteers, or?
Well, you're kind of my straight man here on this, because last year I made we don't identify people, but yeah, I made a recommendation that the Budget Advisory Committee meet or be updated periodically on issues with budgetary impacts that would affect businesses. That was part of the board letter. Nothing ever happened. So here we are today. 4 years ago, we made a recommendation that we put greater emphasis on standardizing permits, streamline the permitting process, to revitalize the permit streamlining task force, and that was 2 years before it was revealed that we had a 7,538 backlog of permits. 2 years. Now I have to believe that had our recommendation drawn some attention, or maybe some caution by the board, that maybe we could have prevented or at least mitigated some of the $12 million in 2 years that are being spent to do away with that backlog. And then I guess my last example is that 5 years ago, we recommended that consideration be given to how effectively this agency could communicate, publicize, and tell a positive story of the significant contributions made in reducing emissions. I wanted to say something at the admin committee when the item was brought up about the putting money towards the right to, not right to breathe, but right to burn.
No, check before you burn.
Check before you burn.
Yeah.
And I guess my comment is that I was as stunned as anybody here last month when the FM3 representative talked about the survey, and so little recognition was given, by the public to the 1,490 voters filled out the survey that they associated with the district. That Right to Breathe video garnered 31.4 million impressions. In other words, it was viewed on the internet. That's 80% of the population of the state of California. And I have to believe that some of those people, had to have been surveyed in this survey, and yet none of them associated the district with that video. In other words, if you're not reaching your target audience, you're wasting our money, because 64% of your revenues come from our fee dollars. So, now if you're this morning it looked like you're going down the same old path as far as authorizing funding for the check before you burn. And I guess my caution here is check before you spend. Are you going to repeat the same old process without any idea of how effective this new program is going to be? I would certainly hope so. So for social media, your goals and objectives, I don't see anything the matter with it, except that, you should require that there be periodic or quarterly or semi-annually progress reports. Who is going to view this new video, and are you reaching your target audience, and are you accomplishing this, and are you getting any brand recognition for it?
I just want to comment that,
Sure.
that the Right to Breathe video is different from Check Before You Burn program.
I know it is.
You understand?
I know it is. But you spent $1.25 million on that video.
And I wasn't in it.
and nobody recognizes you. So let's not go down the same path again.
In Riverside County, we spent $1.5 billion on the 9115 interchange. An organization called RCTC. We got billboards up, everything out there. We had a similar study, and it was a similar number of like 1% of the public knows who the heck RCTC is and who built that $1.5 billion project. Yeah. So it's not uncommon to hear that that government agencies, people just don't know who we are, what we do, and what's going on with them.
No, and a state like California, it's so difficult. I mean, you look at the past election campaigns and political campaigns and so on. I mean, it's very difficult to reach a target audience, but that's the challenge.
One thing to reach them is another thing to actually educate them.
And any marketing
we reached a lot
program,
of them.
You have to change attitudes. Yeah. Are people responding? Are you getting what you're paying for?
But I think your suggestion that we look at that periodically to see what is the performance metric on the money we're spending, say on the Google outreach, on even on the Right to Breathe video, how much good are we doing? How many people are looking at it?
Excuse me, I'm going to ask the question. I don't know if this is really about the budget and discussing it among board members. I'm going to ask our council, can we basically go into areas way outside of that of the budget that have not been really itemized? And I'm saying this because as chairman, to make sure that we don't run afoul of the Brown Act of discussing things that have not been agendized properly before in detail with the board members. of a discussion of that nature. I mean, certainly our guest can speak about whatever he wants to, but to hold a dialogue itself between the board members may not be appropriate. So this is a question that I want to ask General Counsel. Are we getting too far? Oh,
Dr. Parker, my
Bill,
initial.
Bill,
Oh.
let him finish.
Let the council answer.
Dr. Parker, I think so far, I think we're okay. I will say that I do recognize that we're getting closer to the line. I know that there's a time limit on the commenters. I don't know if that time limit's been reached or not, but we will keep an eye on that.
okay.
I just wanted to say, my original comment was the check before you burn, so let's go with that. Thank you.
So if we could just make a few comments in response. Bill, I was at the last week, although somewhat late, budget advisory meeting, and you had brought up the issue of greater notification to the board, and I committed to doing that. So I just want to reaffirm that commitment in front of the board members so you know that we're going to have a little bit more periodic and more frequent meetings on that aspect. Derek, I know you wanted to make a comment with regards to the effectiveness of the Google campaign.
The actual Google campaign is targeted just to our region, just to the 4 counties. It's not going statewide. So when people, put in those terms, certain terms, they're not going to get that. It's only people within our base that are going to get it.
I understand that, but on your website, or you should have, I know I do online, have the ability to know who is clicking on, where that's coming from. Are these people in China, or in Northern California, or
it's within the district
else?
is what Derek's saying.
Yeah.
But let me sort of interrupt here. So on the issue of people should know, people should have a better understanding, I think you heard what Mayor Benoit said in terms of his understanding. I just want to share with you, just last Saturday, a number of us in this room were at an event that AQMD was asked to participate. I want to say there were about 150 people, and the very first thing that I did was, hey everybody, thanks for inviting us here today. How many of you have heard of the South Coast Air Quality Management District? 3 hands went up. 3 hands. And this group, the theme of the event, we demand clean air now. 3 people. And I say that because after the last FM3 meeting and after the briefing of the survey, we clearly have our work cut out for us in terms of increasing the understanding and, more importantly, getting the societal changes, getting the societal realization that there are things that we can all do to improve our air, right? Part of that, we're looking to bring in a director of communications to sort of reassess everything that we're doing, whether it's the social media platform, whether it's our workshops, whether it's our publications. How can we improve the understanding and thereby affect social behavior to get toward cleaner air? So we're working on all of those issues. I don't want you to think that we're not working on it. And when there's something that we can do it quickly, we'll do it quickly. But when it takes a little bit more time, we're going to spend the time to get it done right.
Well, I can tell you, I spent a lot of years marketing, and it's a very humbling experience.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
I think with that said, as the emissions issue kind of changes from being a major focus with stationary sources to mobile sources, it's kind of like we're changing from a wholesale mentality to a retail mentality. So we need individual people out there recognizing the impacts that they're making to emissions in the district. It's not just focusing on just this one large facility and trying to reduce it there. It's reducing for each one of us. And so that's where that branding becomes so much more significant. When you have this small group that you're trying to reach, they know who you are because you're the one that's finding them. We're the one that's finding them, right? But the rest of the folks out there, they don't. And if they don't have that realization, they're not hearing the message of how they can individually contribute, then, the message is lost and we're not going to achieve the goals that we have.
I have comments. But,
Thank you very much, Bill.
Sure, more comments, Dr. Parker, and I want to thank Mr. Lamar. I agree with his comments. I remember several years ago when I was on the board, I looked at some of the outreach we had to the Chinese community. Certain ethnic communities always questioned spending $500,000 where it went, and that's why about 8 or 10 when I first got on the board, I fought to create this film, The Right to Breathe, and worked for many years to make sure it happened. And the purpose wasn't really to highlight AQMD because I'll be going out tonight with several people and I have to sit down and spend 10 minutes explaining who we are, how we're associated with the region, and it happens every time I go with a group of people. It's the same story. But the purpose was, as Wayne said, was social behavior. And I brought that film, and the other film we had was Do One Thing. And I talked about it a lot last week. It was something, how do you change social behavior? How do we transform people's habits? How can we make a film transformative? When we go to a movie and you watch the Black Panther or you watch these different movies, how can something inspires you in that movie, for goodness. How can we transform people's behaviors and say, whoa, I drive a car, there's something coming out of my gas tank that's causing nitric oxide, hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, 5 gases that the bar tests every time when they plug the probe in. That affects people's lives. How can I do something that I can make a change? So I think it's what you talked about. How can this touch our lives? I wish you'd put something more about AQMD in there to associate it with us. But it's what you said. RTCTC did a great thing in that bottleneck relieving congestion. We're doing a great thing with all these films we have out there. It is transformative, but somehow I guess we bring it all together. So we're doing a lot of great work. It's changing a lot of people's lives. People that see those videos, I'm going to a Girl Scout event next week. I'm going to bring the video. Do one thing, because the parents said, what can the kids do? What's one thing? I said, we have to have a video. Do one thing. I'm going to show you. Whether it's turning off the water, getting an electric car, we can all do one thing to transform this world. So we're doing a lot at this agency.
Mr. Chair, if I may, there was a question about, first, I do agree with the comments of Councilmember Cacciati, but there was a question of whether or not having a board member present on the budget advisory committee would be effective. I would defer to staff. May be willing to volunteer that Michael serve on it.
Joe, in Rotary, you do the thing where you always pick someone that's not here.
Oh, I think I did hear him. No, but if obviously, if we need someone, if staff thinks it would be effective to do that, we should consider it. When we bring on a communications manager, which I know you've been looking for some time now, is that it's important that they recognize, with regard to getting people to act, there's a lot of different ways of persuading people to change their behavior, and some real thought and perhaps some research into that will probably be helpful.
Dr. Barger, we have another public speaker.
Hello, Susan
Go right
Stark
ahead.
with Endeavor, and my comments will be much more mundane and prosaic. But about the 1180 refinery annual O&M costs, we were a little surprised at the size of them, so we met with Phil and Jason and others, had a good discussion. We did ask that the fees be reevaluated every 3 years to see if they're still in line with those projections, because it was about 1.7 work years, I think, per station. And thinking that maybe over the course of time, things could be a little more streamlined as the new technology is implemented. But then also that if that was an over projection, as you guys are tracking cost, that there could be a provision perhaps for a carryover to the next year if it hadn't been fully expended. So I think staff was taking a look at those concepts, but just wanted to bring it up.
That's supposed to be revenue neutral, isn't it?
My understanding is yes.
Yeah.
So, just staff agrees with those comments, and we're just working out the mechanics of rule language in Reg 3 and how the economy
Oh, great.
works.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Any further comments from CC8?
Not seeing any.
Okay, the reason why you're seeing me being delayed, because I can't really see what's going on there. My picture is being frozen every 30 seconds, and I see the same picture. So, anyway, there's no further comments there. How about at your location, Supervisor Ashley? None? We have none here and no further comments from any of the staff or
We didn't get the clock.
board members?
And no one here.
Then I'm going to have this meeting itself of the budget presentation to be come to an end, and everyone have a nice weekend.
You too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.